Tonight, the end of yet another challenging week for the 45th president. From uproar over flying the flag to another insider on his way out. One major poll puts the president's disapproval rating at an all-time high. Plus, with midterms coming, Trump's legal team says it's time to put the Russia investigation on hold. Robert Mueller shows no signs of stopping, revealing his first legal link to the Trump inauguration. And moving farewells to two American icons. Poignant moments as Senator John McCain lies in state in the rotunda, and the familiar faces paying tribute to the late, great Aretha Franklin. The 11th hour begins now. Good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. I'm Steve Kornacki, in for Brian Williams. Day 589 of the Trump administration. President Trump is heading into this Labor Day weekend and ending his summer after another very rocky week. He began it by pointedly not participating in the nation's tributes to the late Senator John McCain, who, of course, had been a frequent Trump critic. Monday, there was Trump's reported resistance to putting out a statement prepared by the White House after the senator's death over the weekend. And for several hours on Monday, no public comment.
Mr. President, any thoughts on John McCain? Mr. President, any thoughts on John McCain, sir?
Right this way. Everyone's moving. Thanks, everybody. Let's go this way.
Any thoughts on the legacy? Thank you. Mr. President, do you have any thoughts on John McCain? Do you have any thoughts at all about John McCain? Do you believe John McCain was a hero, sir? Nothing at all about John McCain. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Any action to the American Legion asking you to put a proclamation about John McCain? Why won't you say anything about John McCain?
Let's go. Make your way out.
The president did eventually note McCain's legacy during a speech to evangelical leaders, but by that time, he had already come under fire for raising the flag over the White House to full staff less than 48 hours after the senator's death. Public outrage, including from veterans groups, then forced him to lower the flag back down to half staff. Then on Tuesday, there was this, a Washington Post report that Trump was still actively trying to get rid of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Note that report was about the president's latest efforts to oust the man who was his first campaign supporter in the Senate. Sessions, of course, recused himself from the Russia investigation a year and a half ago. It is the move that ignited Trump's continuing attacks on Sessions. As with many Trump-Sessions stories, this one has a multi-day arc. On the day of that Post report, Senator Lindsey Graham said this about the two men.
This relationship is beyond repair, I think. The president's lost confidence in Jeff Sessions.
Then Politico posted a story saying Trump was personally lobbying Republican senators to pull their support for Sessions as the nation's chief law enforcement officer. And yesterday, Bloomberg reported that Trump had declared the attorney general safe until at least the midterms in November. So while Sessions remains in his job, the president did announce another exit from the West Wing this week, a move made public in his preferred style on social media. Trump writing on Twitter, White House counsel Don McGahn will be leaving his position in the fall. McGahn reportedly was not told the announcement was coming. Just last week, the New York Times reported that McGahn has been a key witness in the Mueller investigation, giving some 30 hours of testimony. That investigation has been the target of Trump's anger for several months now, fueling attacks on the special counsel and federal law enforcement agencies. At a rally in Indiana last night, the president issued this threat.
But our Justice Department and our FBI have to start doing their job and doing it right and doing it now. Because people are angry. What's happening is a disgrace. And at some point, I wanted to stay out, but at some point, if it doesn't straighten out properly, I want them to do their job. I will get involved and I'll get in there if I have to. Disgraceful.
Trump also again took aim at the media, making a point of linking the press to his political opponents.
These are just dishonest, terrible people. I'm telling you that. Terrible people. Today's Democrat Party is held hostage by left-wing haters, angry mobs, deep state radicals, establishment cronies, and their fake news allies. We've got stories that are so big and the media doesn't pick them up. We have stories that if that was about a Republican or a conservative, it'd be front page of every newspaper. And we have them, and they just don't want to write them. It's a dishonest group of people. I will tell you that.
New poll numbers out today suggest the possibility of a significant downward shift in the president's support. Trump's disapproval rating in this ABC News Washington Post survey is at an all-time high, now at 60% in the ABC poll, with a 36% approval rating. Now, for now, this is the only poll to show Trump's approval that low. And so the question is this poll an outlier, or is it the start of a trend that couldn't come at a worse time for Republicans, whose congressional majority, of course, is on the line just over 2 months from now? With that, let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Friday night. Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the NewsHour on PBS, Ken Thomas, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Jonathan Allen, NBC News national political reporter. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Ken Thomas from the AP. Let me start with the AP and its reporting this afternoon on Donald Trump's state of mind inside the White House, writing the president is more volatile than ever, creating new challenges for both his communication and legal teams. Trump built his professional empire on a foundation of secrecy enforced by fixers, lawyers, hush payments, and non-disclosure agreements. Seeing that world collapse around him in recent weeks has yielded intense frustration in the president, who has angrily told confidants that he feels betrayed by a number of former allies. I'm curious if this suggests the confidence the president we have seen him bring to every bit of his political career. Is that confidence in any way slipping because of recent events?
Well, it speaks to the concern that they have inside the White House about how they will be able to combat some of these issues that they see on the horizon. We saw Don McGahn leaving, that he's going to be leaving after the Kavanaugh confirmation is wrapped up. He's played a very important role as White House counsel. The counsel's office is much smaller than it has been in the past. There's about 25 lawyers now, and the administration is looking ahead. If there is a widespread turn of events in Congress where Democrats suddenly control the House, they're going to have to deal with a lot of incoming. And I think the president is seeing that on the horizon, and it's concerning to him.
We mentioned that ABC News Washington Post poll puts Trump at 36%. The president, at this hour, in the last hour, tweeting about it. I can put this up on the screen. He says the ABC Washington Post poll was by far the least accurate one 2 weeks out from election 2016. I call it a suppression poll, but by election day, they brought us out of shame to about even. They will never learn. Yamiche, I guess I wonder about this, too. The president tweeting about a poll that he's trying to cast doubt on it, but a poll here that certainly on its face does not bring good news to him. That does seem a little bit unusual there. Are you detecting any new concern by Trump or the folks around him when it comes to his political standing at this moment?
I think that there's really two sets of people that are looking at this. If you're a Republican who is a supporter of President Trump, you are almost getting more ingrained in your support for him. When I was out in West Virginia at one of his recent rallies, people said that they felt as though he was really under siege and that the Justice Department and all these investigations were really just aimed at trying to get rid of a president that a lot of people didn't want to be there. But of course, if you're a Democrat looking at all this, or if you're an independent American, or if you're a Republican who just didn't support Donald Trump, you're looking at this and saying, there are all these different things going on. There are people that are very close to the president who are being found guilty or who are pleading guilty to crimes. You have Michael Cohen's lawyer saying that President Trump is essentially an unindicted co-conspirator in a federal crime. So people are more and more concerned, and because of that you see them losing even more confidence. I will say, though, that polls were notoriously questionable in 2016. People say that really gave people the false confidence, especially the people that were supporting Hillary Clinton. They kept pointing to the polls saying, well, the polls say that Hillary Clinton's going to be in a pretty good position. Even if the polls showed that it was close, they still showed that Hillary Clinton was likely going to be able to win this race. So, of course, now you have President Trump saying, well, these polls told you that I was going to be president, and they were wrong.
Well, that's the issue, or one of the issues, at least, John Allen. If you think back to the polling in 2016, there were so many of those moments when Donald Trump, I think most Most famously, I think of the Access Hollywood tape a few weeks before the election when there was a story out there, a development, a twist that you'd look at it and you'd say there is no politician on earth who could recover from this. And even if you got an initial indication that Trump's numbers were cratering, they seem to return to baseline pretty quickly. I'm looking at this new polling from ABC News, and I'm wondering if there has been a hit here sustained by Donald Trump because of Manafort, because of Cohen, because of these things sort of all congealing at once here. Do you think this is what we saw in 2016? 3 weeks from now, we're back to baseline? Or do you think this is something that has more legs?
I think we'll have to wait to see, number one, what future polls indicate, but also how these stories develop. I can tell you this. I talked to folks who are involved in House Republican campaign strategy, and they've been expecting that there would be a dip in the polls following, in particular, the Michael Cohen guilty plea. Their view is that things will revert to a mean fairly soon, and that's been the sort of history of this. I think they're probably generally right about that. But even if this poll was off, Steve, even if it's off 5 points, President Trump's at 41% and 55% disapprove, that's a disaster for Republicans heading into the midterms. I mean, what we've seen over and over and over again is this president can't get above water in approval ratings. What we've seen is a hardening, as Yamiche was talking about. His base is hard and fast and tied pretty tightly to him. But there are a significant number of people on the other side who have been so alienated by him that they're going to show up to the polls and vote against whoever's got an R next to their name.
It is fascinating, too, because just before you had that Cohen plea deal, just before Manafort's conviction, our own NBC poll had Trump's approval rating climbing to 46%, which I think was basically the highest it had ever been in NBC's polling since he became president. And now, of course, again, there is the possibility here. We will see if it's replicated in other polls, but the possibility that it has gone south since then. On this question, Yamiche Alcindor, though, we also raised this in the opening there, of Jeff Sessions and his fate. It looks like another rocky week in that relationship. The president now indicating that Sessions will stay on the job through November at least. No guarantee beyond that. A lot of expectation that will be it. But in terms of how that issue there of Sessions' status intersects with the Mueller investigation, is that why the president backed off this week? The idea from some of the legal folks around him that's firing Sessions right now with the Mueller investigation still active would cause a particular problem?
I think there's a little bit of that. There's this idea that there are lawyers in the White House and his personal lawyers saying the last thing you want to do in the middle of being investigated for obstruction of justice is then fire your attorney general. Also, if you fire your attorney general and Rod Rosenstein gets into the office, that's not really solving your problem. The other thing is that the president has to start lobbying senators, as the reports have shown, because Jeff Sessions has a lot of friends in the Senate who have said that they do not want to confirm someone other than they don't want to confirm somebody if Jeff Sessions is fired. Now, you have Mitch McConnell just this week saying that he still has confidence in Jeff Sessions. Mitch McConnell is way more important, and I think a more important factor in whether or not Jeff Sessions could get a replacement or a replacement could be confirmed than Lindsey Graham, who's saying, yes, of course, this relationship it has a problem. It probably cannot be fixed. And I think that's pretty obvious because President Trump is very angry and wants to fire Jeff Sessions, but can't right now.
And Ken Thomas, meanwhile, as we go on the air tonight, tomorrow will be the funeral for John McCain, capping a week of remembrances of him, commemorations of his life. Obviously, the president himself a part of that story, the political and personal tension between them, the president's reluctance to say much about him, at least initially this week. And now we land at a place where the president sort of grudgingly came around to offering some public words. It seemed he will not be at this funeral tomorrow. He was not a part of that service at the Capitol today. Inside the White House, when it comes to this issue of McCain, what has been going on this week?
There's just been a lot of hemming and hawing. We started the week with a question of whether the flag was going to be at half staff. There was the issue of whether they would put out the proclamation, a statement, some type of words commemorating the senator's service. And we end the week with the president largely absent from the scene. And, the presidency carries a lot of moral clarity, often important symbolism. And, we just have not seen that from the president. I mean, you think back to 9/11, George W. Bush rallying the country together. You think of Bill Clinton after the Oklahoma City bombing. You think of Barack Obama in dealing with the spate of school shootings. We often look to our president for that kind of consolation, someone who can help us rise above. And this whole experience raises questions on whether the president may be up to that challenge if we ever do face a serious crisis on the level of 9/11.
And Jonathan Allen, as we're looking at scenes here today from inside the rotunda there in the Capitol, the bipartisanship that was on display, obviously this is not a political issue, this is the remembrance of an American hero, but you had all of these attempts in terms of the choreography of the ceremonies that the McCain campaign had put together to stress the idea of bipartisanship, of Democrats and Republicans coming together, working together. You will have Barack Obama, George W. Bush both speaking tomorrow. How has that altered the mood on Capitol Hill this week, and has it done so in a way that will have a shelf life beyond this week?
No, it will not have a shelf life beyond this week in terms of, you're not going to suddenly see Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer joining hands to sing Kumbaya over anything other than the late senator they were honoring. We've seen any number of opportunities for members of Congress to come together in the interest of the nation in the last decade or so, and they largely revert to what their voters demand of them, which is to be to really toe the party line. It's interesting. I was at the Trump rally in Evansville, Indiana, last night, and I was interviewing people about John McCain and what they thought, and there was a mix. Some of them said they believed he was a patriot. They were happy to have voted for him, said nice things about him. Other people said that he was either a traitor to his party or to his country. I wasn't surprised by that necessarily, because Trump has made such a big deal out of criticizing McCain at his rallies. But, I just don't get the sense that there's a lot of demand from Republican-based voters for Republican members of Congress to reach across the aisle, or from Democratic-based voters anymore for Democrats to reach across the aisle.
There's certainly plenty of evidence to back you up on that. John Allen, Yamiche Alcindor, Ken Thomas, thank you all for being with us. Coming up, the newest plea in the Robert Mueller investigation, this one involving foreign funds and the Trump campaign. And later, a day of remembering from the hero lying in state to a homegoing for the Queen of Soul, the 11th hour. It is just getting started on a Friday night. We are tracking a major development in Robert Mueller's Russia investigation tonight. According to court documents, American lobbyist Sam Patten admitted he made a $50,000 donation through a straw donor to President Trump's inauguration committee for a Russian and a Ukrainian. Patten has agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C. and special counsel Robert Mueller. Patten, who has ties to Paul Manafort, pleaded guilty today to failing to register as a foreign agent. Meanwhile, the Associated Press is reporting today that DOJ lawyer Bruce Ohr was told by former British spy Christopher Steele in July 2016 that Russian intelligence believed it had, quote, Donald Trump over a barrel. Here to talk about all of this, Ken Delaney, an NBC News intelligence and national security reporter, and Eric Tucker, Justice Department reporter for the Associated Press. He broke today's news on that meeting between Bruce Ohr and Christopher Steele. Thank you both for being with us. Ken, let me start with you on this question of Patten, the straw donations, the Trump inaugural committee. I think I had said campaign in the tease, but to be clear, it was the inaugural committee we're talking about here. Take us through what we need to know about this, because I think this is a name that folks was not on people's radar before tonight.
Not a household name, Steve. Absolutely not. Although a name that many people in Washington know. He's a former State Department official. He's a longtime Washington lobbyist. He comes from an old family here. And he pled guilty today to failing to register as a foreign agent because prosecutors say he was working for a Ukrainian political party that was the same party that Paul Manafort helped create in the ashes of the Viktor Yanukovych debacle, where Yanukovych left and fled into exile. This is the man that paid Manafort some $60 million. So it's pretty clear that Pattons came on the radar of the Mueller team out of the Manafort investigation. They passed it on, however. They passed this case on to the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. And in addition to pleading guilty on these lobbying charges, he disclosed, he wasn't charged with this crime, but he disclosed that he was a straw donor and funneled $50,000 to the Trump inaugural committee from his Ukrainian client. So the Ukrainian client illegally paid the $50,000, according to prosecutors, to get tickets and attend Trump's inaugural. What we don't know, obviously, Steve, was this just a case of a wealthy Ukrainian who wanted to go to a party, or was he trying to curry favor with Donald Trump? There are some other examples where some Russians and Russian Americans with ties to the Kremlin attended Trump's inaugural, and there's a lot of questions about why that is, Steve, you know, in the larger picture of Trump's connections to Russians.
Right. And so you mentioned this was actually pursued by the U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. Mueller's team, you're saying, had kicked it over to that office. So now what happens? We say he's agreed to cooperate with Mueller. Does Mueller want to talk to him? Is he now a part of the Mueller investigation? Is there a next step here?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty clear he's probably already cooperating. Interesting that they did farm it out to the U.S. attorney in D.C., but they still have their hooks into him in a sense. He's required to cooperate with Mueller. And the plea agreement also says that he lied to the Senate Intelligence Committee about some of his work for these Ukrainians and about his efforts to buy these tickets to the inaugural committee. And the Senate Intelligence Committee, made a criminal referral to Mueller, the chairman and the ranking member said in a statement today. That was interesting. We hadn't heard that before. But look, it just shows that Mueller his investigation into this whole Russian interference effort and the tentacles and the foreign lobbying and the Manafort stuff continues. It's ongoing. It's not ending anytime soon, Steve.
And Eric Tucker, you have that reporting. We mentioned it. Bruce Ohr at the Justice Department. We know Donald Trump has been out there publicly going after Bruce Ohr. Now, your reporting is Bruce Ohr in 2016 met with Christopher Steele and concluded from that Russia had Trump, quote, over a barrel. What does that mean exactly?
So Bruce Ohr, when he was before Congress behind closed doors, he described this July 2016 breakfast that he had with Chris Steele, and he said that Chris Steele had told him that a former senior Russian intelligence official had used that language, namely that Donald Trump was over a barrel by Russian intelligence. And Bruce Ohr was very clear that he actually didn't know what that meant and couldn't vouch for its authenticity or its accuracy or what exactly Chris Steele was talking about. But he also said that Chris Steele had worked for the FBI as an informant for many years and delivered actionable, credible intelligence, including during an investigation into FIFA, which is soccer's global governing body. So we don't know exactly what it meant. But one thing that's really interesting is we've known for a long time, obviously, what the general premise and thesis of Chris Steele's dossier was, namely that Russia had him over a barrel. But what's interesting, Steve, from this conversation is it's not just Chris Steele's contention that that's the case. Chris Steele is saying Russian intel believes that's the case, and that's what makes this conversation interesting.
And we mentioned the president, Donald Trump, going after Bruce Ohr repeatedly in the last couple of weeks. Here from Wednesday, just 2 days ago, the president put this up on Twitter. He said, "How the hell is Bruce Ohr still employed at the Justice Department? Disgraceful witch hunt." Eric Tucker, does this reporting shine light on why the president has taken such an interest in Bruce Ohr?
So there are a lot of people who contend that the president, among the people he's attacked, are people like Bruce Ohr, like Andy McCabe, who have spent many years focusing on Russian organized crime. I don't know whether that's the case here in terms of that's why Bruce Ohr has become the target of Trump. But it is clear that if you discredit Bruce Ohr and if you discredit Chris Steele in the minds of Donald Trump, you can effectively discredit the origins of the Mueller investigation. And that's why we're seeing these lines of attack being used so frequently.
All right, Eric Tucker with that new reporting. Ken Dilanian, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and coming up, we are just minutes away from Rudy Giuliani's so-called deadline for the Mueller team. So what happens next when the 11th hour continues? It is now just over 60 days until the midterm elections, and it appears the Trump team's demand that a special counsel wrap up the Russia investigation will go unheeded. Rudy Giuliani has said the president would not sit down for an interview with Robert Mueller after September 1st. That is tomorrow. And earlier this month, he told Bloomberg News that, quote, if Mueller doesn't get it done in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we will just unload on him like a ton of bricks. Giuliani seemed to back down on that threat, though, today.
You've said should be a September 1st deadline for Mr. Mueller to finish whatever he's going to finish. What happens if he doesn't?
Well, it's his problem. I mean, it really September 7th would be the date. The Justice Department has a rule that you should stay out of politically charged investigations within 60 days of the election. I hope he respects that.
Or what?
Or nothing. I mean, otherwise it just affects how people look at the legitimacy of his investigation. Is it political, or is it a real law enforcement investigation?
The DOJ rule Giuliani is referencing is a 2012 memo, which states, quote, law enforcement officers and prosecutors may never select the timing of investigative steps or criminal charges for the purpose of affecting any election or for the purpose of giving an advantage or disadvantage to any candidate or political party. The memo does not include any specific dates or windows of time, and so far, there's no indication the Mueller investigation is nearing its end. With us for more, Guy Lewis, a former U.S. attorney who also worked with Robert Mueller, James Comey and Rod Rosenstein, while at the Justice Department, and Paul Butler, a former federal prosecutor and Georgetown Law School professor. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Well, Guy, let me start with you, and maybe you can clear this up, because this 60-day rule, there's a memo we quote right here. I've heard it's an informal guideline. It's not written in paper anywhere. I remember covering politics in New Jersey, where there was 1 or 2 federal investigations of politicians while I was there. I used to hear about this 60-day rule. What exactly is it? Is there anything here that formally or informally is going to guide Robert Mueller in what he does in the 60 days leading up to the election?
So, Stephen, it's an informal rule that we followed at the Department of Justice, and it makes sense. It's a common sense rule that you didn't want to indict, charge, publicize anything right before an election that would tend to influence or otherwise cause favor to one side or the other. I mean, we at the Department of Justice, we wanted to be apolitical. We wanted to stay out of this kind of thing because you can imagine, especially in New Jersey, Florida's the same way. Immediately before the election, you'd have people come in as the U.S. attorney knocking on the door saying, oh, this candidate is doing this kind of skullduggery. This candidate's doing this kind of fraud. So you had to be very careful about that kind of allegation and not get involved in local, even state elections in order that the appearance would be to influence that election. And that's what's going on here.
Well, so Paul Butler, I guess the question is, does any of that apply here? Donald Trump is not a candidate for office this year. His name won't be on the ballot anywhere. Of course, it's all about his party. Do Republicans hold the House or the Senate for that matter? But Trump is not a candidate. The investigation, the folks who seem to be involved in this aren't candidates themselves. Do you think anything that any of what Guy was just saying there will apply in terms of Mueller in this investigation right now?
I think so. So the memo you referred to is from Attorney General Eric Holder. And what he says is that prosecutors should avoid actions that might impact an election. So it doesn't necessarily have to be targeted against a candidate. I think that Mueller will respect the spirit of that guideline, but I don't think he's counting off the days until September 7th, as Giuliani fantasizes. Steve, we got to push back against Giuliani's hype and spin that Mueller's dragging his feet. Far from it. You know, most special counsel investigations don't result in any indictments. So far, year and a half, Mueller's indicted 35 people, some of whom pled guilty. He got those 8 felony convictions against Paul Manafort and he's got a long way to go.
Yeah, I'm curious, Guy, what do you make of Rudy Giuliani initially sort of drawing this line in the sand for the start of September, now moving it, I think he said September 7th, there's 60 days, also seeming to back off how serious that would be if Mueller didn't finish things up by then. What do you make of Rudy Giuliani's posture here? Is it all from a public relations standpoint? Is there a legal component to it?
Paul's 100% right. It's just posturing. Stephen, that's all it is a defense lawyer posturing, trying to put pressure on the prosecutor. And I'm sort of surprised about this. Maybe he's doing it for the client and to make the client happy. That happens sometimes. But in terms of Bob Mueller, I mean, let me tell you, we're dealing with a former Vietnam vet who was wounded in action, who got who was awarded the Purple Heart. He has been a United States attorney, has been a chief of the criminal division. That guy's been through it, and he's not going to be influenced one way or the other by Rudy Giuliani saying, I want this thing finished on this day or else. That's just, it's frankly kind of silly.
You know, and Paul, it occurs to me as well that this question of what will happen between now and November, one thing is already on the calendar, correct? The Paul Manafort trial.
You know, Steve, Mueller's got a long things to do list. So one is to get Paul Manafort convicted in that D.C. jury trial that happens in September. He's got to make a decision about whether he's going to subpoena Donald Trump, which would start off a big, huge battle that would end up in the Supreme Court. That obviously isn't going to happen in the next couple of weeks. He's got to make a decision about Jared Kushner, about Don Jr. They have exposure, including from what's going on in the Southern District of New York federal investigation. So they might be liable for campaign violations. In addition, Don Jr. may have lied to the Senate when he said that the president wasn't told about the meeting with the Russian lawyers in advance. So I can go on and on, but again, no way can this be wrapped up anytime before, I don't know. We're talking, again, an average special counsel investigation takes years and years. This is just a year and a half in.
All right, Paul Butler, Guy Lewis, thanks to both of you for joining us. And coming up, President Trump plans to throw a Texas-sized rally for his former rival, Ted Cruz. First, though, he has to find the state's biggest stadium. Why that search may be more complicated than you might think when the 11th hour continues. Well, this was the president on Twitter earlier today. He says he's going to be doing a major rally for Ted Cruz in October. He says, I'm picking the biggest stadium in Texas we can find. As you know, Ted has my complete and total endorsement. His opponent is a disaster for Texas. The rest of the spiel there, but you get the point. The president says he's going to Texas for Ted Cruz, and not only is he going to Texas for Ted Cruz, he wants to find the biggest stadium possible to do the rally. And, well, the biggest stadium in Texas, does the president know what he's potentially getting himself into here? Because to fill the biggest stadium in Texas, that could take a lot of bodies. How many? Here's an idea. First of all, if you go by the official capacity, the official listed seating capacity, Kyle Field, College Station, that's Texas A&M, home of the Aggies, that has the biggest capacity in Texas, 102,512 people. But guess what? For extra special events, they can squeeze more, and they have squeezed more than 110,000 bodies into there for a football game once. So that is the biggest stadium in Texas, probably. Would Trump want to go there? Would he want to have the rally there? Here's one complication if Trump were to choose Texas A&M. Guess who is affiliated with Texas A&M? George H.W. Bush. This is where his presidential library is. He does a lot of his post-presidential events there. He's very affiliated, associated with that school. Of course, the Bush family and the Trumps, they don't exactly get along these days. Maybe that would be a problem. So where else could Trump potentially look? Well, how about Arlington, outside Dallas, AT&T Stadium? This is where the Cowboys play. This is the big Jerry Jones Stadium. The capacity, it varies by event. They've squeezed 108,000 in there. Maybe Trump would feel more comfortable. Jerry Jones, of course, has been on Trump's side when it comes to that issue of kneeling. You see a picture last year. Jones brought the team out before the anthem to kneel. Then they all stood up up for the anthem. He says he doesn't want a Dallas Cowboy player kneeling, so they're sort of allies on that. Maybe Trump would feel more comfortable there. If you want to be more technical, though, about the biggest stadium in Texas, try this one on for size. The Texas Motor Speedway racetrack, auto racing, 181,000 people can fit in there. Now, it gets into the whole issue. Do you consider a racetrack, a speedway, folks driving around in cars? Do you consider that a stadium, or does the stadium have to have, you know, a track and field or soccer or football? Does it have to have some kind of sport besides auto racing? But again, you could technically say 181,000 folks could fit into that speedway, so maybe Trump would want to try that. Here is the bigger issue, though. 102,000 at Texas A&M, 100,000 at AT&T Stadium, 180,000 at the Texas Motor Speedway. Trump has been doing these big rallies since he became a candidate back in 2015. But has he ever come close to 102,000 to 100,000 to 181,000? Well, we went back and we looked, and I got to tell you, there are no exact numbers out there. They don't necessarily give out tickets and count stubs and take attendance at these rallies. So, you know, we don't have exact numbers for the Trump rallies. We've seen his estimates. Sometimes they're different than the fire department's estimate. They're different than the media's estimate. But I think if we could say this, if you went with the most generous interpretation for one of these Trump rallies we've had so far, it was probably back in August of 2015. And willing to say we could be wrong on this. We could be off by a few thousand this way or that way. But probably the biggest single Trump rally that's happened so far was at a football stadium in the football-loving state of Alabama, in Mobile, Alabama, in August of 2015. Maybe you remember this one. And the crowd there was probably 20,000 on the low end to 30,000 on the high end. And that's probably about the best Trump's done. He's probably come close to that a few other times when we could find looking back at these things. So that's the challenge for Trump. If he wants to find the biggest stadium he can in Texas, he's got some options. You could fit 6 figures there when it comes to people. But the biggest Trump rally so far in 3 years, about 20 to 30,000. So that would be quite a challenge for the president if he wants to live up to what he put in that tweet there. All right, coming up, thousands of people have been standing in the heat late into the night, paying their final respects to John McCain, the senator's stirring farewell in Washington when the 11th hour continues. Today was not business as usual on Capitol Hill. It was where lawmakers, staffers, and members of the public gathered to remember the late Senator John McCain. At this hour, Senator McCain is lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda after thousands of people lined up for hours today, paying their final respects. Moments before a ceremony began this morning to honor McCain, heavy rain poured down as U.S. service members escorted McCain's flag-draped casket up the Capitol steps. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, House Speaker Paul Ryan, and Vice President Mike Pence all delivered heartfelt remarks as Senator McCain's family looked on.
Half a world away, wearing our nation's uniform, John McCain stood up for every value that this Capitol building represents. Then he brought that same patriotism inside its walls to advocate for our service members, our veterans, and our moral leadership in the world. So it is only right that today, near the end of his long journey, John lies here in this great hall, under this mighty dome, like other American heroes before him.
John McCain deserves to be remembered as he wished to be remembered. A patriot who served his country. A man, yes, of the Senate, but also a man of the House. A Navy man. A family man. A man who made an enormous difference in the lives of countless people. A man of conviction. A man of state. There's a line from his farewell statement that really just grabbed me. Our identities and sense of worth are not circumscribed but enlarged by serving good causes bigger than ourselves. That's John McCain. How fitting and how true.
We gather here today to honor an American patriot, served a cause greater than himself. And we gather here remembering a man who knew how he wanted to be remembered. And so let me say to all those gathered and his beloved family, on behalf of a grateful nation, we will ever remember that John McCain served his country, and John McCain served his country honorably.
Following those comments, Senator McCain's wife, Cindy, walked up to the casket to once again say goodbye. She was followed by other members of the McCain family. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle in both chambers of Congress then gathered around to say their farewells to their colleague. And tomorrow morning, a memorial service for Senator McCain will be held at the Washington National Cathedral. Former Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama are both scheduled to speak. And then on Sunday, Senator McCain will be buried at the U.S. Naval Academy in Maryland. Coming up, more than 500 miles away in the city of Detroit, there was a celebrity-filled celebration of the life and the accomplishments of Aretha Franklin. A celebration complete with dozens of pink Cadillacs. We'll look at some of the day-long tribute to the Queen when the 11th hour continues. Last thing before we go tonight, a star-studded send-off in Detroit for the Queen of Soul, lasting more than 7 hours and complete with an entourage of pink Cadillacs. It was a moving tribute celebrating the life of an American icon, Aretha Franklin.
She took other people's songs and made them her own. When Otis Redding heard her sing, he said, "She done took my song." Oh, yes, she did, and he was glad she took it, because she spelled out in a way he never spelled out respect.
You know, the other Sunday on my show, I misspelled respect, and a lot of y'all corrected me. Now I want y'all to help me correct President Trump to teach him what it means. And I say that because when word went out that Miss Franklin passed, Trump said she used to work for me. No, she used to perform for you. She worked for us.
My mother died in 2009, and it was her who introduced me to the voice of Aretha Franklin. We would be driving up to the country, and she would have the music blasted, and I could tell what my father had done by the music she was playing. If she was playing Respect or Think, I knew he had done something wrong. But if she was playing Dr. Feelgood, he might have done something right.
It feels amazing to see a woman so fierce, so courageous, gifted, so respected, and to be able to call that my grandmother, to know that I have that running through my blood, and that she's a part of who I am.
She lived with courage, not without fear, but overcoming her fears. She lived with faith, not without failure, but overcoming her failures. She lived with power, not without weakness, but overcoming her weaknesses.
It has been said that hers was a once-in-a-lifetime voice. That is simply not true. Her gift was almost otherworldly.
And she moved us all, not only with her songs, but through her spirit and through her love.
And that is our broadcast for tonight. Thank you for being with us. Brian in the 11th hour will be back on Tuesday. For now, have a great weekend, a happy Labor Day. Good night from NBC News headquarters in New York.